Welcome to Desperately Seeking the 80s. I am Meg, and I am here with Kevin, who is kindly filling in for Jessica today. And we're going to keep the same format. I'm going to tell Kevin a story from the 80s in New York City, and then he's going to tell me one. Thank you, Kevin, so much for helping me out. Jessica came up against all these deadlines, and you are a godsend. This is very, very, very kind of you.
Thank you so much for having me. I am super excited to be here.
And some of you guys might know who Kevin is just because we talk about him all the time. He is the owner and proprietor of Malt and Mold, which has kindly hosted us for our 100th episode party. And you are our leader for the East Village pub crawl. We did our first live taping at Malt and Mold, which just feels like...
that was super exciting.
It was very exciting
great
for us, too. And gosh, I'm just thinking about how wonderful Malt and Mold was then and how it's even grown now. Like, it's just got this awesome outdoor space. It's really fun. It's like a clubhouse, a wonderful place for the neighborhood.
Like a living room.
Yeah. A living room with beer. I have a weird question for you. Do you have, like, a favorite beer? Or I know probably people ask you that all the time, but if they're all your babies, you don't want to like privilege one over the other.
There's certainly that aspect, but I try and think of it the other way. When I go to somebody else's or someone's brewery, I will often first order a Saison if I can, because I don't drink a ton of Saisons in my daily bartending life, but it's a really interesting, great way to judge a brewery or kind of get to know a brewery because you can't hide behind a Saison. Everything that you do is right out there.
And is a Saison a kind of beer? I thought that was a kind of wine. Am I crazy?
Oh, I don't know about the wine world, but I can definitely speak to the beer world. It's a Belgian-style beer, and it just means in French, the season, and it was brewed during the farming season for the farmers. It was generally lower in ABV, and they could drink it while working.
So what is it about Saison that makes you go like, this is what I know about this establishment?
Is a beer where the yeast does most of the talking, and that provides a ton of the flavor, but also you can put a ton of hops into any beer and kind of hide the flaws, and there's not a lot of hops in a Saison, so if there are flaws, and generally people don't put theirs out if there are flaws, but if there are flaws, they're going to be exposed. It's light on the palate. And it's very delicate, and it's usually pretty complicated. So it's also a very good beginning beer if you're going to have more than one.
Okay.
Because then you can go deeper and deeper and a little bit stronger flavors after that without killing your tongue.
This is very important information, I feel like. I've learned a very important lesson. I'm having dinner later tonight over at Pete's Tavern. Would that be a place where I'd ask for a Saison?
Definitely not.
No, I'd just go Stella
just
there.
Stella
okay.
Or Guinness, really, I think is your move. So, Kevin, do you know what a gin mill is? Ooh, now that you're asking me in that particular way, I don't think I do. I thought it was a bar.
Yeah, it is. But is it a particular kind of bar?
Speakeasy?
Interesting. I guess that makes sense because
that's the only time I would have heard it referenced was during Prohibition.
Okay, during Prohibition.
But it's not a speakeasy.
I don't know.
Oh.
I mean, is a speakeasy just a place where you're serving alcohol and you're not allowed to?
Yes.
All right. Do you know of any gin mills that are still in existence? Or former gin mills?
Oh, that used to be, but are now legal, and you can go there?
Yeah, I guess.
Or actual places that are still illegal serving, because I don't know of any of those.
Of course you don't.
But I don't think Chumley's exists anymore, but Chumley's was my only one.
Wait, that was in the West Village?
West Village, yeah.
Is that the one, is it 69? And that's what 69 came from?
I don't think that's what 69 came from.
You don't think so?
86 came from
that. 86. Oh, shit.
69 is something totally different.
Yes, bad me. Yes, 86 came from.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Okay. Because that's the address on whatever street Chumley's was on.
I think so.
And we don't know what street Chumley's was on, but it doesn't exist anymore. Is that correct?
It had a fire, it burned down, it was supposed to come back. It might have even come back for a moment. I don't think it's open today.
Oh, that's
But
sort of a
please don't
shame.
quote me on any of this.
Did you go there?
I've been there several times to drink. I also did one of those great West Village literary pub tours and lots of great fun facts when I was there.
So if it's not Chumley's anymore, what is it? Like what sort of like...
I don't think it's anything now, because if it is and I find out about it, I will go there just to check it out because it's a neat space.
And what's another kind of neat space that still exists that we know of that's like in that kind of category?
Now they have sort of fake speakeasies, right? Where they put a bar behind some sort of fake storefront or an existing storefront. There's a really cool one on Eldridge Street next door to Vanessa's Dumplings. And it's one flight up, and I believe it's a working hair salon. And then at night, they just leave the hair salon empty with an open door, which I think is the most fun part about it. You just walk through and there's no one there. And then you walk to the back door and push through, and then there's this tiny pocket-sized Japanese-style bar.
Ooh, awesome.
But they do advertise that there's a speakeasy on the chalkboard downstairs, but that's the only way to let people know. But then there's other speakeasies that don't let people know.
I belong to this, I follow Secret New York. Have you seen that? It's like an Instagram page.
I don't think so. I might.
It tells you about things like that, but I'm like, as soon as they're telling me about that, isn't it now going to be crowded? And
yeah, now it's
not
blown
really,
up, right?
Yeah. But it's fun to see all those kind of cool things popping up around the city. All right. My sources are The New Yorker and The New York Times. In 1981, Robert Hayes, Kim Hopper, and Ellen Baxter, and these were all friends who met in their 20s when they were students at NYU and Columbia, and they founded, like these kids in their 20s, they founded the Coalition for the Homeless, which is still around, and it advocates for and directly serves homeless people in New York City. And their mission, these kids, their mission began in 1979 when Kim and Ellen started interviewing men they saw on New York City streets who were, quote, sleeping rough. Robert, who was a young lawyer at the time, he was struck by the number of homeless men living on the streets in his neighborhood around Washington Square Park. And after talking to Kim and Ellen, he decided that the city was not doing enough to help. So the homeless population had skyrocketed in the 70s, specifically for men, because veterans were returning from Vietnam with physical, mental, and emotional scars and addictions. And all these patients had been released from state psychiatric hospitals beginning in the late 60s, and the closing of SROs created this perfect storm of need, but specifically with men, which I thought was very interesting. There was nowhere to go once the SROs went away. And in New York City, many headed to the Bowery, which had been always, as you know, like the epicenter of gambling houses and brothels and gin mills and flop houses and, dating back to the Civil War. So the Bowery, during this period of time, still welcomed the down and out and desperate, and until the 90s, still had SROs. You know what an SRO is, I assume.
Single room occupancy.
Exactly. Have you ever had any experience with them? Or do you remember when you first found out what they were?
When I first moved to New York, I saw these places and didn't know what they were and just walked into one time to see.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early 90s, you could just pretty much walk in, and there was security, but there was single men just walking in, no matter how you were dressed. Although in the early 90s, I'm pretty sure I might have looked like someone who lived there or dressed like someone at least. And yeah, you could just wander through the hallways and see.
Yeah, I remember there was one, we lived on East 7th Street for many years in the 90s, and there was one on St. Mark's. I would never have been confident enough to walk into one as a girl.
Right.
But yeah, I was like, what's going on there? All right, so SROs offer inexpensive, small rooms and the residents usually share a kitchen and a bathroom down the hall. So you've just got your room. And SROs were a lifeline to many who would otherwise have been on the street. But in 1961, there was a zoning resolution that dissuaded developers from investing in SROs, and neighbors' fears of poverty, overcrowding, and unsanitary conditions significantly reduced the number of available SROs. Moving into the 70s, not a very good time to do that because they didn't realize that, suddenly there was going to be a great need for them. The neighbors, usually definitely not fans of SROs. One described living across from an SRO in the 80s. This is a quote. "At the time, I could look out the window and watch hand-to-hand drug deals and a steady stream of traffic going in and out of the building, people seeking out its unsavory mix of drug use, drug sales, and prostitution. We have photos of hypodermic needles and condoms on fire escapes and more than one police raid on the building." But closing down these SROs only exacerbated the growing problem. Homelessness had not been a significant problem since the Depression, which I also thought was interesting.
That is interesting. I would never have guessed that.
I know. And during the Depression, Mayor LaGuardia was able to pass a constitutional amendment to help those in need. This is Article 17, Section 1. "The aid, care, and support of the needy are public concerns and shall be provided by the state and in such manner and by such means as the legislature may from time to time determine." We know obviously why during the Depression there is a need for extra housing. But moving into the 40s, the unemployed went to war. And in the 50s, things were pretty prosperous. And New York was still like a working man's town. It was a manufacturing town. In 1964, a team of researchers went out to document the homeless, and they could only find a small population of older, mostly white men on the Bowery. So it just wasn't an epidemic.
That's fascinating, but also crazy to hear.
I know. It's just, that was news to me, right? But by the mid-70s, it was crowded out there. Robert, the guy I was talking about at the very beginning, the young lawyer guy, he met 3 homeless men at a Catholic mission and filed a class action lawsuit on their behalf. These men were given nowhere to sleep except the, quote, big room, which was a dangerous, unsanitary, and crowded overflow area of a municipal shelter. And sometimes they couldn't even fit in there. So the city, once the homeless population ballooned, didn't have any resources to take care of them. They were really caught flat-footed. Robert argued that "shall be provided" in LaGuardia's amendment meant exactly that, shall. And he won. Justice Andrew Tyler stated, quote, "The Bowery derelicts are entitled to board and lodging, and the city has not made adequate provision for housing all the destitute and homeless alcoholics, addicts, mentally impaired derelicts, flotsam and jetsam, and others during the winter months." Also, I think pretty interesting that homelessness really was they were considered just the guys on Bowery.
Flotsam and jetsam.
Flotsam and jetsam. And people who were coming on hard times mostly because of addictions, alcoholism specifically. Now, once word got out, more than 1,000 men started seeking shelter every night, and the city completely freaked out. And they had to scramble to provide for them. And sadly, the man whose name was used in the lawsuit, Robert Callahan, the lawsuit was Callahan versus Carey. He died of alcoholism on a street near the Bowery soon after the ruling. Now, you could get a room in a downtown SRO in the 80s, there are few of them left because remember that in the 1960s, the zoning regulations made it just like not even worth the effort and the money for developers to keep them up or to build new ones. So that was a housing solution that suddenly just disappeared overnight, but there were still a few of them around. And the ones that were around in the 80s, you could, for about $40 a week, you could have a room. And counter to their reputation of housing a transient population, many of the residents stayed there for years and years. But the local welfare program was overhauled in 1974, just making a bad situation even worse. Before that, qualified people received $150 a month for rent and $100 a month for food, clothing, and everything else. But after 1974, they decided to overhaul the whole thing, and now people in need got a supplemental security income of $206.85 to cover everything. So suddenly, many could not even afford to stay in an SRO anymore, and those were the cheapest rooms in town. And if you can't afford to stay there, they're going to close down because...
Now they have no market.
Right, exactly. It took away the market. Crazy.
Which almost seems like that was purposeful.
You think?
Yeah.
Oh, God, that's awful. But then where are they supposed to go?
Right back to the Bowery, where they've always been.
The Sunshine Hotel. Do you know of the Sunshine Hotel?
I don't think I know any of the names.
There was a documentary about it. And they covered what it was like to live in the Sunshine Hotel in the 90s. And I think it's still there.
Ooh. On the Bowery? Like right where
it's
the White
on the
House
Bowery.
was
It's at 241 Bowery. And actually, I do know this. Whoever owns it, they can't just kick the longtime residents out of there. All they can do if they want to sell it, is offer to pay them to move. And many have taken that money, and some have not. And the people who are staying there, they have every right to stay there until they die.
Also a straight up New York move.
Except they don't have to take new people in. So that's the deal.
Right. So each vacant room is now just a vacant room.
Exactly. So they offered men a bed, a locker, and a bare bulb in a room about the size of a prison cell, 4 feet by 6 feet and 7 feet tall with a chicken wire ceiling. According to Chris Franz, who is the drummer for the Talking Heads, who moved into that neighborhood in 1974, this is a quote from him. At the corner of Bowery and Houston, you are likely to see a bunch of guys drinking cheap wine, such as Thunderbird or Night Train, and hanging on for dear life to the chain link fence that surrounded the lot there. One or two would be vomiting, and another would have his pants down around his ankles as he relieved himself and then wiped his ass with his bare hands in broad daylight while traffic whizzed by. Some of the crazier guys would venture out into the intersection to direct traffic. Others would ask for a handout from people in cars stopped at the light while cleaning their windshields with an oily rag or a piece of dirty newspaper. In those days, these poor drunks were known as bums. Close quote. So bars, now we're getting back to like the gin mills, bars along the Bowery welcomed, quote, these poor drunks, who were the staunchest alcoholics. And if you wanted to drink yourself into a stupor, you'd be in good company. Back in the 30s, there were several gin mills along every block of the Bowery, and as late as the early 70s, there were still a dozen. But by the late 80s, there were fewer SROs. We know where this is going. There were more artsy people, like the drummer for the Talking Heads, spilling out of CBGB and La Mama, and more bars like Phoebe's and Marion's. So it's just a different demographic hanging out in that neighborhood. The last rummy bar, or old man bar, or gin mill on the Bowery closed in 1993. In its prime, Al's offered refuge to 50 customers a night until 4 a.m., but by the time it closed, only 20 would maybe shuffle in each day. According to Bruce, the bartender, quote, now people drink alone in their rooms, if they have rooms, or they go to the parks if the crackheads don't chase them out. He also suggested that the old men don't feel as comfortable in the neighborhood as they once did. The city shut down the public baths during the AIDS crisis, and trendy eateries replaced restaurants, which offered cheap meals. Quote, the Bowery used to be the center for the hiring of casual workers. There were employment agencies for dishwashers at resorts or messengers, and they're gone. So are the barber colleges where the men could get haircuts and dental schools where they could have their teeth fixed by students, which I thought was so interesting.
Right.
There was just a whole community there that could support people who were down on their luck. And once those things started going away,
Right. I remember those places, those barbershops and the dental school. It would never have occurred to me that that would be part of their patient base, customer base.
absolutely. And without that, what are you going to do? You're no longer welcome in like really the last place that you felt like you had a community and a support system. And the old timers were very different from the new crop of men. So all these guys who were down on their luck because of war, because of, the things that we discussed before, it's different in the 80s because of crack. This is a quote from Monsignor John Ahern of the Holy Name Center Mission. In the past, you would get people who had left wives or jobs or the army to drink. The new homeless men of the 80s are much younger. More of them are black. Crack has changed things. Crack is a younger person's drug. There's more isolation, more rage. One regular at Al's said, quote, anybody can be a drug addict, but it takes a real man to be an alcoholic. And another, who lived across the street at the Salvation Army residence, said, you see, we're not allowed to bring a bottle into the mission. Even though crackheads bring in their crack, somebody would see a bottle, but crack vials are tiny and easy to bring in. And when asked about the only bars left in the neighborhood, quote, the college boys go there now. The prices have gone up. There's not so many veterans anymore. Yeah, I mean, all those artists who are like, we can slum it on the Bowery, actually were somewhat responsible for
Artists
pushing
and young admin assistants at small publishing houses. I feel like I might have been part of the problem.
But times change. I mean, what are you going to do? But I had never heard that perspective before, or really, I guess I had always sort of assumed that there was always a homeless population in New York.
First and foremost, it just blossomed in the 80s, and I'd heard, or my recollection of it was that Reagan specifically had changed some either regulations or laws or funding, and that specifically contributed to it booming. And it sounds like it was as much economics and crack just sort of on its own, and a little bit less to do with that, although obviously that sounds like it was still big part of the problem.
Perfect storm, all these different elements. And also really interesting to hear that the city just wasn't prepared for it. I mean, if it had been a gradual escalation, it would be one thing, but it kind of sounds like it hit the city suddenly.
Right. And it also, I had never thought about the impact of Vietnam veterans, specifically in regards to New York City's homeless population. But when you put that together, the wars prior to Vietnam, the Army and society in general had been much better at helping ease their transition back. And in Vietnam, people came back on their own, not in large groups. And so they were on their own. And they're not being welcomed back into society, and they're going to have problems with alcohol. And a lot of them are going to come through New York City to begin with. So they're going to stop here because at the time, there was that little bit of an ecosystem.
I was also reading about how homeless, and again, it's so interesting that we're talking about men, We're not talking about homeless women. We're not talking about homeless families. We're talking about a very specific demographic. This was the problem that was first addressed. It was men. It wasn't until 1982 that the right to accommodation was extended to homeless women.
Oh, interesting.
I know.
Right.
And it wasn't until 1986 that it was extended to homeless families. And it was even later than that to people with AIDS. That there was a right, that
Right.
people had a right to some kind of care and housing. But also that in those earlier years before the balloon that we were just talking about, these were men who left their families.
Right.
And so they had a memory of stability. But then when you're talking about Vietnam vets and also people addicted to crack, they might never have known any stability at all. They might have, as teenagers already been disenfranchised.
You mentioned that they were younger. So
Right.
they never even had that first experience. But also the society, our city would have addressed just men first. If the stereotype forever has been that they were Bowery bums and they were men. And so it does occur to me, politicians are just like us. They're thinking in terms of stereotypes as well. They don't have they have access to all the information that we probably didn't have back in the pre-internet era, but they don't, they're just dealing with things that are right in front of them. So in my mind, I do give them a little bit of a break in that they just wouldn't have thought of it. Of course there's no female homeless problem. If you had read about the Bowery, if you had read Joseph Mitchell and you moved to New York in the early 90s, as I did, you could literally, if you wanted to see what an SRO looked like, right, I forgot about the chicken wire ceiling on the rooms. And most of them had, not most of them, but enough as you wandered through, had their doors just wide open because there's nothing to steal.
Interesting.
And I do remember that as like eye-opening to see a room with chicken wire. There's no ceiling, there's no privacy.
But I also remember in the 90s, in the early 90s, mid-90s, I guess, Bowery Bar. Suddenly it was also really trendy to hang out on the Bowery. You were kind of slumming it, but it was really cool.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't get in, so it was that cool. Madonna used to hang out there, I believe.
Indeed. And now, the Bowery Bar is closed.
I could get into Marion's, though, and Marion's was my first real cocktail bar, and I loved that place.
And Alice just went to Phoebe's the other day.
Yeah, Phoebe's is Phoebe's. I don't think you can get a $5 pitcher of Bass Pale Ale anymore, but you could back in the day.
And it's college boys, no doubt about it. Always has been. Just a new group of them.
Meg.
Yes.
I have an engagement question for you.
I'm so excited.
What was your first craft beer? Do you remember?
Oh, I have I don't even really know does craft just mean like Budweiser didn't make it or something?
Sort of, but I'm going to take you back. Okay, you're in college probably, and all you've ever been drinking are
Rolling Rocks. Corona.
Yep.
That's it.
Bud Light.
Oh.
All
right.
I love that you differentiate between those. That's fantastic. And there was not a moment where you saw this new beer that was not nationally advertised and you thought to yourself, oh, that's different. I need to try that.
Not until I was a legit adult, I think, when I was like, I was a very heavy smoker and beer was my alcohol of choice.
Sure.
And when I stopped smoking, which was an extremely difficult thing to do,
I can imagine.
I switched to wine because I just had to have a different sensory experience. And so it was actually quite a while until I went back to beer. And I would say it was, I think it was like after I had kids. So now I'm a grown up with kids. And so I don't have a Rolling Rock. That's sort of...
Right, blasé, right?
I was like, that's a kid drink. I need to have something darker. But do I know names of things?
Okay.
Is Stella, does that count? Sierra Nevada?
Well, Sierra Nevada definitely counts.
Okay, there
we'll
you go.
That. Fantastic.
Great, we got there.
But Stella is a very good beer. It's an import as opposed to an American craft beer.
Okay.
That's the only the distinction I want to make there. I definitely don't want to disparage Stella, although people disparage Stella all the time, and I think it's very unfair. And I'll just leave it there. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Okay.
Brooklyn Brewery was founded in 1987 at the nascency of the modern American craft brewing movement. Two neighbors in Brooklyn, Steve Hindy and Tom Potter, were bored with the bland macro brews, and they wanted to return brewing to Brooklyn. At the time, there were less than 100 breweries in the U.S. So now, prior to our current moment, the high point for the U.S. brewing industry goes all the way back to 1873. There were 4,171 breweries. And Brooklyn alone had 48 breweries in the late 1800s. So it wasn't necessarily that Prohibition killed off the brewing movement. Even as the volume of beer that was produced increased, the number of individual breweries slowly declined. And by 1920, the year that Prohibition went into force, there were roughly 1,300 breweries in the U.S. The expansion of the rail industry meant that breweries willing to risk expansion themselves to use their economies of scale to make a more efficient beer put many of those breweries out of business. And this was still when the industry was producing great tasting beer. When Prohibition finally ended in 1933, there were only about 330 breweries ready to start brewing again.
Let me see if I get this right. So you're making beer in your American brewery, and then Prohibition happens, and you don't just decide you're going to make widgets. You decide we'll just hold off for a second, and then we'll just we think this will be temporary.
No. Interestingly, they all moved. So they all attempted, or virtually all of them, attempted to stay in business. Most of them, almost all of them that did decide to do that, made non-alcoholic beer, near beer, which was a product that people continued to consume. Most of them also made soda because that was an easy transition. And then surprising to me, many of them produced ice cream. Now they've got the cold storage, they've got a lot of the things that go into it and being able to distribute it. There's no frozen food trucks at that point. So you're still dealing with making something and trying to deliver a cold product to a consumer, but you've got a lot of the other aspects that you can do that. So ice cream was a fun one. My favorite one is that Coors had a bunch of clay deposits on their land, and they started making ceramics, and it was called Coors Tech. And Coors Tech today still makes more money for the Coors family than the beer does. The latest number I could find was 2015. It was the largest industrial ceramics producer in the world.
Wait, ceramic like what? Like a bowl?
I couldn't quite delve into my frustration getting that little nugget and then not quite being able to figure out exactly. I don't think they're making pottery. I think it's like industrial products.
That makes sense. Like maybe ceramic tiles.
But then I couldn't figure out, what exactly are they making? And that is another podcast worth of research for me to do.
That's wild. Can I tell you my great Brooklyn Brewery story?
Please.
Because that might have predated my ordering of Sierra Nevada. Because when I was doing theater in the 90s in New York City, Brooklyn Brewery was extremely generous as far as donating to fundraisers.
Yes, they were.
We were all drinking Brooklyn Brewery beer because they would send it over in cartons.
That was their entire marketing philosophy.
Tell me.
They do not readily spend money. You see Sam Adams commercials on TV, and you did, even as far back as, I think, 1990. I have to check the exact date. Sam Adams had a completely different marketing strategy. Brooklyn Brewery got their name out by donating beer to events all over the city, and they basically immerse themselves into everyone's just cultural experience. And that's how they became the dominant beer maker that's so branded with New York City.
And I have to say, to this day, my eye goes straight to that logo in a freezer, like in a refrigerator. I'm like, Brooklyn Brewery. And I've got great associations with them because they were so kind.
Yeah, they did all the right things. And they're still here today.
I love
partially because of that.
Smart because they're generous.
The reason that logo is so memorable, Milton Glaser, famous for designing the I Heart New York logo, designed the Brooklyn Brewery logo.
How did they get him?
He was a big fan of what Steve Hindy and Tom Potter were doing about trying to bring really good beer. No one was calling it craft beer. No one was thinking about microbreweries. Just this concept of bringing a real authentic product back to a place where it was associated.
So better than Budweiser is what they're going
Better than
for.
Budweiser. But I think for Milton Glaser, and again, I'm just an opinion, that he just liked the authenticity. And it really, I don't necessarily know that it mattered what that product was going to be, but just that it was integral to what this place used to be, and that he was able to find that association. With definitely that logo invokes Brooklyn Dodgers, but all things, that were authentic to that borough.
You want to make something that is local, and so you name it after the place.
Right.
I know.
But there were a ton of breweries that there was New Amsterdam Brewing, and they didn't make it. And that was a cool name, because it had an older association. Yeah, just too cool, perhaps. Also, maybe the beer just wasn't quite as good.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day when there was only 3 or 4 craft breweries in your neighborhood, it was all good. But as more and more started coming about, the shakeout happened. So that's where Brooklyn, the liquid, always was first. And then there's the logo, and then there's the generosity, and figuring out how to become part of the culture.
Very cool.
All right. So now jumping back into how we get there, Prohibition finally ends in 1933. There's about 330 breweries that start brewing beer again. And Steve Hindy, quoted in the New York Times, saying, "Then came the great homogenization of beer. Americans felt the national brands of beer were better than local, and the fate of the local breweries was sealed when they tried to compete with national beers by trying to make the same product. Their beers lost their individuality and distinctiveness."
That's when they're trying to be like Budweiser instead of trying to do their own
Precisely.
thing.
And cheapening the product, and also trying to compete with costs. So now in post-Prohibition, the large breweries the few that are left are now fighting with each other for remaining market share and just cheapening the product down to the lowest common denominator. Now, during this, the beer scene in Brooklyn remained fairly robust. In 1960, or as late as 1960, breweries in Brooklyn were still producing 10% of the beer consumed in the entire U.S. So they're fighting the good fight against the Anheuser-Busch's and the Millers of the country. But ultimately, homogenization came for them as well. And the last 2 breweries left in Brooklyn, Schaefer and the brewery that brewed Rheingold, closed in 1976. Coincidentally, that year, Jimmy Carter signed a law which allowed for homebrewing, which previously had been illegal. That year, 1976, also saw the founding of New Albion Brewing by Jack McAuliffe, and that's out in Colorado, so we're a little out of our borough here.
Wait, I'm curious, why did Jimmy Carter, because I remember Billy Beer, of course.
Right. Yeah, of
named
course.
After
Although I'm not entirely, I don't know if that was a real thing or if that was a brand for a big company. I have no idea.
Yeah,
what that actually
what
happened.
was
Right?
up with Billy Beer?
I'm going to come back to you with a follow-up. I'm going to email you and Jess with that.
Definitely, because Billy Carter, Jimmy Carter's brother, who was
famous for drinking,
and he was very much not like his lovely, smart brother. There was such a thing called Billy Beer.
Right. And it was a big deal.
And
I don't think his brother Jimmy was very happy about it, if I recall correctly, because it did kind of diminish.
But isn't it interesting that Jimmy around the same time is going you can make it in your bathtub.
Right. It's weird that was actually a law that you couldn't do, unless that was one of the Prohibition laws. Is not only can you not sell beer, you can't even make this stuff at your house.
Yeah.
And then when Prohibition was repealed, they were like, let's leave that in place. I have no idea. I'll also look that one up.
Yeah.
So at any rate, 1976, the founding of this craft microbrewery, New Albion Brewing, by a guy named Jack McAuliffe in Colorado. It's a seminal moment. It's the first true microbrewery in the U.S. So prior to that, we have one large craft brewery called Anchor Brewing, making Anchor steam. It's owned by a guy named Fritz Maytag, a scion of the washing machine family. It had been a large brewery. It was about to go out of business. Fritz Maytag has all this Maytag money, buys it, restores the original recipes, and creates a massive macro craft brewery. New Albion only lasts 6 years, closes due to lack of funding for expansion, but he inspired the next wave of microbrewers who in effect launched what is now the current craft beer scene. And this is all the way back 1976 and 1982. Those pioneers who name him as their influence include Ken Grossman of Sierra Nevada Brewing, Jim Cook of Boston Beer Company, a.k.a. Sam Adams, and Sam Calagione of Dogfish Head. The nadir for breweries, the amount of breweries, 1980. There are only 44 breweries left in the U.S. Now, again, producing great quantities of beer. So there have been slowdowns in the growth of volume, an occasional stagnation. We're in stagnation right now, but almost never an actual decrease in volume. So it's always been an upward trajectory.
Huh.
Sierra Nevada opens in 1981. The Great American Beer Festival opened in 1982. They found 20 breweries, serving 40 different beer styles to over 750 people. So you can sort of see there's this market for it, sort of. And then Boston Beer Company opened in 1984 with Sam Adams Boston Lager. That brings us back to Steve and Tom and Brooklyn Brewery. They start out by contract brewing at the FX Matt Brewery, maker of one of my favorite regional adjunct beers, Utica Club, up in Utica, New York. And they deliver their first batch of Brooklyn Lager to a bar called Teddy's in Williamsburg in 1988. Now, Steve is a former AP foreign correspondent in the Middle East, and he learned how to homebrew while stationed in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, countries where alcohol is forbidden under Islamic law. And like I mentioned, they get Milton Glaser to do the logo, and that helps their branding. And then when they really take off is they hire Garrett Oliver to be their brewmaster in 1994. Now, they're still contract brewing, but that's when their beer starts to becomes distinguished. He comes out swinging with Brooklyn Black Chocolate Stout, which is a Russian Imperial Stout. It's rich, velvety, clocks in at 10% alcohol by volume.
Whoa.
And he put the local beer scene on notice that while their classic European style would continue to be their moneymaker, he was going to shake things up a bit and experiment and make some big and interesting beers. And then in 1996, Steve and Tom fulfill their mission to bring brewing back to Brooklyn. They open a production facility and then 2 years later a tap room, which are both designed by their resident Renaissance man brewmaster, Garrett Oliver. And this all happens in Williamsburg, but their brewmaster is designing the buildings. He goes on to write the Oxford Companion to Beer.
What?
He's a noted scholar and speaker on the subject of beer. And if you ever get to see him in person, he's just this fascinating guy who doesn't really embrace the celebrity, and yet he's just a celebrity. I think he's just this magical human being.
That's wonderful.
Who makes great beer. At their party, though, they get the mayor at the time, Rudy Giuliani, to host as their brewmaster for the day, pouring beer to a raucous crowd of local dignitaries. Brooklyn beer, now served in 30 countries over 5 continents. Garrett Oliver has won many prestigious awards, including being the first brewer to ever win a James Beard Award.
Ooh.
And there are over 14,000 breweries in the U.S. today.
And we can thank these guys.
But they are part of that movement, an important part of that movement. And as much for making Brooklyn part of it, you never know, right? You never know what happens. But if New York City's not part of something, it seems like it's going to take a little bit more of a leap.
That's very interesting. And I wonder, too, does New York water have anything to do with the...
I do know that when Paul Honor Brewing from Munich opened a brewery in New York City, they tested the water because you can add elements or subtract elements to replicate water from anywhere.
Okay.
They found that New York City water perfectly replicated Munich water. So yes, you can make great beer with New York City water.
Well, I'm not surprised. It's also interesting if the American beer movement or craft beer movement is happening in different parts of the country, that if New York isn't in on it, we're such an epicenter.
Right.
Sorry.
Well, we're also jingoistic about our own city. We'll drink other people's beer, but we're going to complain that we don't. And there's been ebbs and flows. And when West Coast breweries started to take off in the early aughts, New York City had just Brooklyn Brewery and Six Point, and both were making their own thing, and they weren't doing these big West Coast IPAs. I don't want to be definitive on that, but it wasn't quite to the same level. And it wasn't until the 2010s where all of a sudden there was another brewery in New York, and then there were 4 more breweries, and now I don't even know how many there are, at least 25, possibly 40, depending on how you count and what you count as a brewery.
So what's a good brewery to go to? Can you visit? Do they have tap rooms?
Without naming favorites.
Without naming favorites, just
Talea
one.
Brewing is owned by 2 women, Tara and Leanne.
Okay.
Their home base is out in Williamsburg, but they have tap rooms in another part of Brooklyn on the other side. That's not Williamsburg.
I'll post
They have
that.
one in the West Village. I believe they have one in Bryant Park. So you don't necessarily need to go out to their home base. Everyone's making great beer in New York City. They also are making very, very great beer.
Awesome. Thank you. I love this story. So you know how Jessica and I usually do like a tie-in?
Yes.
What did those two stories have in common? I think it's a pretty easy one. Like we both just talked about bars.
Bars and beer. Delinquents. Jetsam and Flotsam.
Flotsam and Jetsam. And you brought a growler with you today from Malt and Mold. What was in the growler?
Oh, it's Brooklyn Brewery Oktoberfest.
Oh my God.
To stay on the theme.
Of course. Well, cheers. Thank you so much, Kevin. This was amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. I had the best time.
Yay.